Welcome to the Big Me Kickoff as I turn on my lights as I forgot because I was so busy talking to our special guest hosts. I know, just rookie error. Tony Gerdeman, Tom Moore, you have the whole gang here from Buckeye Huddle here on the Big Me Kickoff. And I was joking with Tony beforehand. I said, what if I introduced the show first off by saying how many days there was until the Indiana game and the game? And then I rocked a power pause. Tony was not very enthusiastic about that. He thought Tom was hilarious. But if I started to get into the power pause, there was going to be a scrap. So we'll just get right to it. And gentlemen, how are you doing?
Well, Tony, there are 57 days until the Indiana game. And I do agree with Kevin. His show would be better if it was more like our shows.
Me and you should just talk back and forth and ignore Kevin.
There you go. For those of you listening at home, Kevin has now removed himself from the online video stream. So, yeah.
We are such good guests.
So go ahead and hit that thumbs up button right now before he comes back in. Appreciate you guys on the live stream.
It's like getting an Airbnb and turning into a squatter.
Wow. When I dropped out of there, I was able to close the door to my office because I have already gotten a text message from my wife saying, your radio voice is way too loud. Shut the blank up. So that's the joys of both of us working from home. But no, really glad that I have both Tom and Tony here, so you guys don't have to listen to me go on and on by myself. And Jordan Kapler says 2/3 of the show is fantastic, but I wouldn't talk about Tony like that. I mean, I wouldn't leave him out. That's pretty rude. Where Goes One is excited, and yes, give us a thumbs up, as Tom said. Even in spite of what Tom said, still give us a thumbs up. We really do appreciate it. And
in spite of Tom.
Yes. Said, an hour plus of spontaneous Buckeye talk. Well, you have watched the show before. We have planned nothing. So get those questions in, and that will give us things to talk about, or we will just start to haze each other, sort of like the situation at Northwestern, which, again, is an unfortunate situation. All joking aside, Pat Fitzgerald suspended 2 weeks. That's going to be a little bit more than $200,000 of pay for his knowledge or no knowledge of what was going on there. But how big of an issue is it when you get suspended during the month that coaches are not really in the building?
This will slightly impact his income level for this year. I think the biggest fallout from this is now we know what Pat Fitzgerald gets paid, because Northwestern, being a private school, is not subject to FOIA. So his contract was always kind of a little bit vague. So now you can take what he lost for his suspension and multiply it times 26, and then ta-da, now you know what Pat Fitzgerald makes. As far as impact for the program, there's a reason, Tony, that this came out now. Because, boy, if you were to pick 2 weeks of the year in which you could go ahead and take a couple weeks off, and in fact, many college football coaches and assistants are probably in the mountains or on the beach somewhere, this feels like the 2 weeks that you would probably choose.
Yeah, camps are done. You've got a couple of weeks before Big Ten Media Days, and this is probably when everybody is out there. I do think I think this is further proof of Pat Fitzgerald's win 3 games every year at all costs mentality that has run amok at Northwestern football. And, he needs to, hopefully this reins him in and calms him down. But yeah, it is. Yeah, you wonder how much of this stuff is going on. I think there's some sort of phasing just about everywhere, but it's the levels. There's playful stuff, and then there's just stuff that, if I had to go through it, then you will have to go through it, and that's where it gets a lot out of control at times. So it is an interesting peek behind the Northwestern football curtain, as you said, because of the private school thing. But I hopefully they learn from it, and I wonder if suspending coaches a couple weeks for their players' antics might reach into the SEC one day.
No,
I can't drive 55. I mean, that just what's going on in Athens is pretty crazy with all the speeding. I've been to Athens, Georgia, and if you blink, you kind of miss it. And when you get to the outskirts, I can understand that, but we certainly have heard the stories of things going on within the city limits, and Old Kirby he needs to get his arms around his program a little bit, because he's another one of these coaches that there's a lot of talk about win at all costs. Or we see, is this boys will be boys, or is there a bigger problem here?
Well, when you have the kind of situation they had back in January, where you have a staffer and a player die because they are driving at an excessive speed in the middle of the night after being out at the bars. And I mean, that's just, it was like, for a long time, Georgia and traffic offenses was kind of this like whimsical thing where Georgia, back in the Fulmer Cup days, 15 years ago, Georgia would always be at the high. This was like an off-season crime tracking thing, basically, where it was, mostly whimsical stuff like, hey, another Georgia player just got arrested for illegally operating a scooter or speeding on a scooter or whatever. And it was just kind of treated as this kind of ha-ha thing. When you have a player die and a staffer die as a result of a high-speed crash, literally, 6 months ago, at some point it stops being quite so whimsical, and you would think you might view that as something you should crack down on, and they haven't. So, I don't know that this is, this is not something that is going to be, the beginning of the end of Georgia football or anything like that. But, it feels like you're allowed to learn lessons from mistakes that other people have made. You don't have to make all of the mistakes yourself before you can learn. You're allowed to learn from mistakes made by others. This feels like a real learning opportunity for Georgia that's not necessarily being taken advantage of right now.
Yeah, I think the ESPN report said this is the 10th traffic or speeding violation for Georgia since that accident. And like I said on Twitter, either Kirby Smart has so little regard for the player that he lost and the staffer that he lost that he doesn't bother to like really instill on his team, like, we are not doing this. This will not be tolerated. Either he has so little regard for the people that he lost in the program, or they have so little regard for him that what he has told them just falls on deaf ears, and it doesn't matter because I'm going to go do 90 and a 45. I don't care how desolate the streets are, and we're not. I mean, these are certainly that's excessive speed for a highway. You're doing 88, 90, and a 45. Like, you're just asking for somebody to get killed, and he is tolerating it because they're still doing it. So once you stop tolerating it, then it stops happening. And somebody responded to me on Twitter, like, for a speeding ticket, you're wanting Kirby Smart suspended. I'm like, this, you obviously don't know the entire story, because this is not a speeding ticket. This is not a speeding violation. This is not even the bottom of the iceberg. It's the tip of the iceberg. And you wonder how many more of these occurred in the weeks and days and months leading up to the January accident. And it's so stereotypical SEC that this is happening right now, and it's very disappointing.
Yeah, I mean, it is very problematic, and it's easy with just a straight up speeding ticket or whatever to make the joke. How long is the suspension going to be? I don't know how good's the backup and things of that nature, but if you don't try and get your arms around it at some point, it's going to get its arms around you.
Well,
and we've already seen loss of life, with that kind of led into a lot of this. And now the message has not resonated in the Georgia football facility at this point. So what's it going to take to get these guys to wake up? Is it going to take another tragedy, or is it going to take, the adult in the room, who's supposed to be in charge, to sit there and put his foot down? And I guess the bigger question is, will he, or would he?
Let me answer that question for you with 3 words. University of Tennessee Martin. That is their first opponent this year. Ball State is their second opponent this year. I mean, I think this is one of these things where you have to remember how stupid you were as a 21-year-old or 19-year-old. Back at that age, everyone is sure they're immortal and nothing's going to do anything for them. So, something bad happened to someone else. Well, I mean, that's not me. You have to, the punishment that's a punishment is take away something that they care about. And If they feel like they're immortal, then that's not something that's going to make an impact on it. So, okay, suspend these guys for the UT Martin game. I have a great feeling, Kirby Smart, that you will probably be able to just sort of squeak by the, I'm going to say Skyhawks, but I'm not entirely sure. And you want to make a real point, suspend him for Ball State too. Oh boy, you think you can get by the Cardinals? That I think you might. So you have to make it, it has to hurt a little bit. The punishment has to hurt. You spend all fall going through fall camp, and then you don't get a chance to go out there against UT Martin. You have to watch your teammates play, and you're out there without, shoulder pads in your helmet. That's a punishment you might feel. How much is that going to impact them for the week 2 game against Ball State? Probably not all that much. You want to suspend them for 2 games? Well, week 3 South Carolina, so you're not going to do that because you got to get them a week before they get to the South Carolina game. But this is why lots of teams schedule the absolute layup in week 1, because it's a chance for them to go out there and work the kinks out. And if you're missing a player, who gives a crap? It doesn't matter, because you're going to be favored by 56 to 63 points if you can even find a book that has the line on the board. So this feels like a real opportunity to do something that will have absolutely no negative impact whatsoever on Kirby Smart, but might set a dangerous precedent. So therefore, he might not do it.
It is the Skyhawks town.
Wow, I'm going to take the rest of the day off. I'm even impressed with myself on that one.
I mean, isn't that a Buick label or something? A Skyhawk, or was that a Skylark?
Skylark.
That was a Skylark. But yeah, if you get, the hope is to play 15 games in the year, which is 12 regular season, a conference championship game, and then 2 in the postseason. You lose, if you lose 2 of them, then you're losing a decent amount of what it is that you're working the rest of the year for. But yeah, it could, as to Tom's message, it could set a dangerous precedent where there is accountability, and then when something else happens, does that player get suspended? Is it against somebody that is not a Buick? Does it happen against does it happen against an SEC foe? I don't know.
Well, remember when Bobby Bowden, when he wouldn't suspend players, he's like, why would I punish my team for one person's actions? And that was basically, and I think he has maybe also, or I don't know if it was him, but would suspend, the suspensions would bounce around. You'd find a bad opponent. It's like, okay, we're suspending you for week 4. We need you for week 3, things like that. But I also remember saying this stuff was only going to get worse and more dangerous with the NIL stuff. And NIL is a good thing. But giving cars to 18, 19, 20-year-olds, Tom, you were saying, remember us as 19-year-olds? I could tell you it would have been not a good idea to give me a car like, 400 horsepower at 19 years old, because yes, we all were impervious to everything. And it's not a good idea. And this, if all we get out of it is speeding tickets, that's fantastic, but it's not all we've gotten out of it. And it's not going to be all we get out of it moving forward.
And this is not a brand new thing. I mean, NIL, it's a little more open that some football players have fancy cars, but you go back, if you want to Google Eric Dickerson Gold Trans Am, that wasn't even from the team he ended up signing with. That's the punchline to that story. But this is not a brand new thing, but these are guys who, some guys get fancy cars. I think CJ Stroud had a Bentley last year, and I just saw Kyle McCord has, I think it's like a super fancy Mercedes. But there are guys who are getting, the Dodge Challenger or whatever, the souped up live life a quarter mile at a time kind of car, and that you're sort of inviting danger there. I saw earlier Tony Gerdeman's Burner account talking about this being a, are you guys expecting the NCAA to do anything about it? No, this is not an NCAA matter. The NCAA doesn't have any kind of jurisdiction here, really. This is just purely you're in charge of your own team. Don't allow your players to continue to make the same mistakes that cost you a player and a staffer 6 months ago. That's a pretty straightforward thing.
I want to throw something out, and then we'll get to It's Just Me, Tim, and then we'll talk a little recruiting, because that was part of the headline. I don't want to be a liar for this, but you remember when at LSU they had we're going to have a team vote if there should be a punishment on something or not. I mean, maybe that's what's happening in Athens right now. they're going to have a team vote and see what's going to happen. And I'm sure there'll be a letter put in their personnel files that they were very naughty and they probably should not do that. But it's just me, Tim, 79, asking if you could have any car, what would it be?
I'm not at all a car person, like not at all. So I drive a small, crappy car that gets good gas mileage because I just drive back and forth from where I live to Columbus a lot. So I am probably the least qualified and least interesting person to answer this question. I know Kevin and Tony both drive nicer cars than I do.
Newer.
Nicer
too. I have a car that a deer ran into last October during the rut as I was driving my son home from hockey practice, and I've kind of looked at it and gone, yeah, I mean, I'll fix it at some point, but it doesn't really, the car works fine, so whatever.
Tony?
Well, my last car, I put 200,000 miles on it, so I'm with you, Tom. Like, it had a dent in the back rear panel, quarter panel, where I got hit on 270, and it's like, it's just, it's fine. Everything's fine. Growing up, I always, because I'm an 80s kid, Lamborghini Countach was like my dream car, but I would not be able to drive it, just, physically, like get into one of those small cars. Then, I'm a Mustang person too. Not that I've ever had one or driven one, but I think the 65 Mustang would be like a dream car. But I'm with, like, I just need something that gets me around. So I don't really have, because I have lived the life, like I said, my last car, 200,000 miles, where you're driving around and you hear noise and the panic sets in. Like, what is that? I like not having that. That's my dream car. No noises. That's basically it.
I want Tony's car so he has to walk.
My dream car is a car that's paid off. That's
yeah.
Well, I'm getting there. On my 700-year note on my car, I can see the light at the end of the tunnel, and it's either true light or it's a train. But I'm almost paid off on my GMC Terrain.
Yeah, I have never had a new car in my life. I will probably never own a new car in my life, and both my wife's car and my car are paid off right now. So it's like, wow, look at all this extra money we have every month. This is fun. We should definitely keep not having to have car payments. That is my dream car, not the one that doesn't have a car payment.
Super chat from Ryan Dawes. We will get to the recruiting portion here in a minute, but super chats always get you to the head of the line. Referencing Tom and Kevin's list on under-the-radar impact players, will those players play in big games or blowouts? What threshold do they have to meet for you all to consider them impact?
So this was on the episode of Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning that dropped today. That's confusing when you phrase it that way. And we're going to do the defensive side of the ball on Monday's episode of Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning, which is also not tomorrow. So, this was just basically guys who are going to make a difference at some point during the season. And the list from the episode that went up on Friday was Dallin Hayden, Jaden Ballard / Xavier Johnson, Joe Royer / G. Scott / Jelani Thurman / whoever's the second tight end, Josh Simmons and Josh Fryer. And I think most of those guys are going to be playing in some kind of a meaningful spot at some point. And you look at someone like Xavier Johnson, for example, he had 2 touchdowns last year. One was the, I think, go-ahead touchdown, or it was the lead extending touchdown in the second half against Notre Dame. And the other one was a touchdown against Georgia in the Peach Bowl. Those are 2 pretty significant plays. Joe Royer is someone who had, I think, 2 catches for 10 yards last year. He's going to play a bigger role this year. Josh Simmons, Josh Fryer, these are just guys who people are kind of not talking about. Like we spend a lot of time talking about the quarterback battle. We spend a lot of time talking about Marvin Harrison and Emeka Egbuka and Travion Henderson and Mayan Williams and Donovan Jackson and Cade Stover. These are just sort of, the idea is just, these are other guys who, when we've done all these other shows and talked about all these other guys, these are people who are maybe a little below the radar, but who, at some point this year, Joe Royer is going to make a real big play for Ohio State. Dallin Hayden's going to score a really crucial touchdown for Ohio State. That was kind of the goal with those shows. Not so much, this is going to be someone who is going to, have 600 yards receiving or something like that. It's just kind of, these are guys who are a little, not getting talked about as much as they probably should be.
I think it also comes down to, for me, when I look at it, it's like, who do the coaches trust? And we know for a fact they trust Xavier Johnson because of the way they had to rely on him last year. So, like, that's a guy that could play in the first play of the Michigan game or wherever. Like, he's not a fourth quarter of blowouts guy. He's a whenever you need him at any point, they can rely on him guy. And I think maybe that's how I view the threshold is how much do the coaches trust them. I'm interested to see, Kevin, if Jaden Ballard is there yet. I think we all expect some moments from him, and Brian Hartline talks a good game, but I would like to see Brian Hartline like prove it. And then not that it's up to him to prove it. I guess it's up to his players to prove it. We saw quite a bit from Jaden Ballard this spring. I'm wondering how much we see of him early on in games.
I mean, is he interchangeable with Julian Fleming? I mean, they're both tall receivers, but Julian Fleming is much more broad and he's a devastating blocker out there. And with Ballard, we just really haven't seen enough. I mean, we obviously see him, and we know that his body type is not, it's not pound for pound with Fleming. But are they at a point where you could just sit there and take one out and put the other one in, and not really have to change what it is that your expectations are?
Yeah, and we obviously Brian Hartline has talked about everybody has their own path, everybody has a different path. Julian Fleming's path has been unique. Jaden Ballard's path, same class as Emeka Egbuka and Marvin Harrison, certainly a different path. But now this being year 3, is he ready to be relied upon? And is it because of maturation? Is it because like something like that? How much is he being pushed by Carnell Tate as well? They may not be playing the same position. One may be an X, one may be a Z. But if you're the 4th, 5th, whatever receiver, they'll get you on the field and move other people around. So I wonder how much he's being pushed as well, which will help him and will help everybody.
Let's get to recruiting, and let's start off with Ohio State picked up a big commitment on the 6th with Miles Lockhart out of the state of Arizona. You guys had an opportunity to talk him up a little bit on a recent show, so I'm going to just throw that right to you, and then Big Sim, I promise we will talk about KJ Bolden after that. I promise.
Miles Lockhart out of the state of Arizona, he's the 300-ish ranked player in the class, which you look at where he is and where Denzel Burke was at the time. That Denzel Burke was a rather lowly regarded high 3, low 4 star coming out of the state of Arizona. And you can pretty easily draw yourself a map to Miles Lockhart will be a pretty darn good player at Ohio State. I think the more important piece of Miles Lockhart is he's the 2nd corner in this class. You have already Bryce West in the class, top 50 type player nationally. You have Aaron Scott out of Springfield announcing his decision on July 30th. That's an Ohio State versus Michigan battle. We've talked a little bit about the fact that July 30th date is his father's birthday. His father's a big Ohio State fan. So, you can certainly try to read the tea leaves there and see which way the wind might be blowing in terms of Ohio State versus Michigan for Aaron Scott. But if you've now got 2 corners in this class, potentially you're adding a 3rd corner in the class at the end of the month. Lockhart's a little shorter than the other 2 guys. He's 5'10". Maybe that makes him the slot guy in this class, but this is a position group where you've got to bring in guys every year. You're turning guys over. You're seeing corners leave potentially after 3 years, after 4 years. This could potentially be the last season for Denzel Burke. This could potentially be the last season for Jordan Hancock. There are guys, and that is a spot where you've got to keep churning the roster, because with the transfer portal, they've lost some guys there. They've lost some guys in terms of late flips. Guys who were committed to Ohio State who ended up flipping at the last minute and going to another school instead. You've got to keep that room stocked. Miles Lockhart and Bryce West and potentially Aaron Scott. Boy, that would be a tremendous class. But you've already got 2 guys in this class now. You've got one of the Ohio guys. You've brought in someone who you've targeted from out of state. That is a really that's the start of a very, very good class for Ohio State.
Yeah, and Tom, you and I have talked about Miles Lockhart and as that nickel. So I was very happy to read Alex Gleitman spoke with him, and he said he was being recruited as a nickel. So it's fantastic when we see something and say, what this guy ought to do, and then the coaches are like, yeah, you guys are right, because we know Ryan Day, of course, listens to the show. So, but I mean, that kind of stuff made sense. Kevin, we were all watching the Miles Lockhart Instagram announcement, and boy, so was Aaron Scott.
Yeah, Aaron Scott was saying a lot of positive things, and then Miles Lockhart at the end of the broadcast said, "Aaron, you're next," and then also made mention of KVA, the California linebacker, Kingston
Viliamuasa.
Yes, thank you. It's going to take me a minute, and then I'll be able to rattle off a Palaie Naote Ote, or when Ohio State was pursuing Henry To'o out of the transfer portal, for the former Tennessee linebacker that ended up at Alabama. But my Polynesian names need a little bit of work. But yeah, I mean, it's really interesting to see how, with social media, and it's not brand new, but this class really seems to be interested on a high level in terms of recruiting guys around them. When you have uncommitted kids who are watching other kids commit and things like that, we've come a long way since, the advent of the Brew Crew.
Was Charles Woodson watching the broadcast? I don't know that I saw him on the Miles Lockhart commitment.
I don't know. I think he was signed in under Tony Gerdeman's burner account.
Ooh, that's Kevin. That is uncalled for. Completely uncalled for. I don't know why Miles Lockhart is rated so low at Odysseus 2002. Kevin, you're the recruiting rankings network guru. Like, what the heck, man?
I think it comes down to trying to determine what his position is at the next level. I mean, he is an athlete, so sometimes when you don't know which bucket to put a guy in, then you are a little hesitant, because once you get a guy into 4-star range, higher 4-star range, they're in the top 100, top 150. Any sort of movement at that point causes other dominoes to have to be moved as well. So I think it's just easier until you know what a guy is supposed to be at the next level. I think now that he's committed to Ohio State, they can now go off what Ohio State has recruited him as, and then they can kind of figure out, okay, well, now we have to sit there and put him in the corner mix. We have to figure this out. And I think that's where the move is going to be. I want to kind of follow that up too. There was another question. I think it was last week. I think it may have been last week, but somebody asking, after Aaron Scott, would they be done at corner with 3? And I think you could be comfortable with the 3 right there. I mean, I think if, I don't expect them to get Corey and Gibson. I don't really know if I'm as bullish on Xavier Brown, the corner out of Mater Dei. I mean, I think they could be fine at 3. I think that if a situation arose, then where you had to sit there and consider taking 4, the necessities there, as I think it was Tom mentioned, starting kind of going off guys that could be out of the program after this year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if you've got a top 50 guy who just sort of comes out of the blue and says, "Yeah, I'd like to be in the class too," like, you could probably make that work. But they certainly, with 3, numbers wise, that's probably about where the target is for them. How many guys are we expecting them to take in the secondary overall? 6, 7? I mean, something like that. If you think, that's probably about where this class ends up. This is probably a 26, maybe 27 guy kind of class. They're at I think 18 now. And you've probably got another 2 to 3 defensive linemen you're looking at, probably 1 more linebacker. So there's, 3 or 4, another corner, another safety or 2. I mean, and then you're kind of, maybe another offensive lineman somewhere, maybe another, another offensive skill guy somewhere. I mean, you're going to fill out the class with probably something around those numbers, but I don't think realistically they could take more than 7 defensive backs. Probably that's probably about the maximum you'd be able to realistically fit without having, some pretty serious roster churn if you were going to try and make this a 28, 29, 30-man class.
And before we get to this question, Kevin,
yes,
I just want to say, like, it was only recently, like in the last week or so, that 24/7 actually listed Miles Lockhart as a corner instead of a running back. So, I mean,
and in Arizona, I mean, how much do you go out and scout the state of Arizona? I mean, you have California, you have Texas, you have Florida, where these national services have guys on the ground. And then when you sit there and you get into other states, are you going to just do it all based on tape? Are you got to get out? Do you have to get out there in person to see them? So I think there is a lot. There is a lot to that. You're right.
And
I
if you're
think-
looking for something to feel good about, who's the low service on Miles Lockhart? Oh, it's ESPN. So if you want to feel good about that, who do you want not in your corner? Boy, that's if you had to choose one service to not be in your corner, that would be the one you would probably choose.
And I do also think there's going to be a ceiling of where they will rank a nickel, kind of like Kevin was saying. Now that they know the position, there's going to be, I think there's a ceiling for him because he's not an outside. He can play outside corner, but Ohio State's not looking at him that way. So I think he's got a ceiling there.
All right, let's get to this next question, and I'm going to adjust it a little bit, and I'll explain why. But Big Sim has asked us a few times, if Bill thinks Ohio State leads for Bolden, why won't he put a crystal ball? Well, unless we've had a staff change, I don't think that we have anybody named Bill on our staff. So I'm not going to say that, but I will rephrase it to this point of, if there's a belief amongst the Ohio State experts that Ohio State may lead for KJ Bolden, a very talented safety out of Buford, Georgia, why won't they go in and put in one of these, crystal ball, future cast, RPM, whatever you have there? And, I'll take first swing at it. I think different people view those things in different ways. I think some of them go out on fishing expeditions and just throw them out there. I think some people are like, I need to have this on lockdown. As somebody kind of joked, oh, they need to see like a signed letter of intent before they're going to sit there and put in a crystal ball. I know that this morning I saw on one of the networks somebody putting in a Georgia prediction. It was not a Georgia writer. It was a Clemson writer. And, I don't know what information they're seeing. I don't know if they're going on a fishing expedition. I just know based on my conversations with Mark Gibler, my conversations with Alex Gleitman, and on the information I'm finding out on my own, I like Ohio State's chances there. Would I sit there and put in a 10 out of 10 confidence level? No. I mean, Cruton's Cruton. You just don't know. But as for an expert's reason for not going to the mat and putting something down, I don't know. But at the end of the day, it's not like these things are binding and going on any sort of permanent record.
I think it's entertainment for everybody because we look for them and it means something. I do like the inclusion of, we'll rate your crystal ball on a 1 to 10 in terms of how how much you how serious you are. I think for me, like if I were to do this, I'm not gonna put a crystal ball out there that I don't think is at least a 5 or a 6. Where I'm pretty confident, like a 1 or a 2. What does that even mean? And so, like I could think Ohio State leads for KJ Bolden, but if I'm at a 2 and I'm not at my threshold, then I'm not going to put a crystal ball there to answer the question of why wouldn't somebody. And Kevin, you had the future cast when you were at Rivals. Like, where did you? I mean, I'm sure there are people you thought would probably end up as Buckeyes that you weren't quite confident enough to go ahead and put your prediction in.
Well, and I would go round and round with that because I hated being the guy 6 days before the commitment coming out and stealing their thunder. Okay, I've heard that he's committed, so now I'm going to put that out there. So I probably went on more fishing expeditions than most, and I got stranded on Gilligan's Island a couple times because that's just how it worked. But we were all highly encouraged to put in future casts and things of that nature. So it creates conversation. We're talking about stuff in terms of that right now. So I mean, that just proves it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy there. But yeah, I had to feel pretty good, but there were times, I got in really early on a couple guys. I think I got in really early with JT Tuimoloau or whatever, and I'm just like, bleep it. I'm going to just ride with this and see what happens, because it didn't. I mean, there wasn't like a bonus in my paycheck for everyone I was right. I didn't get fined for ones I was wrong. There was absolutely zero consequence there. So, that's why I kind of sit there and roll my eyes when I see some of these, because there are certain markets that have experts in certain networks that pick everybody to go to their school, and then under the shadows and under the cover of darkness, like 24 hours before a kid's commitment, slide into what the prevailing wisdom is there, and nobody's any wiser.
Kevin, I have a question. When you had a future cast prediction, did you ever make a pick based on a recruit's mom's earrings?
I did not. I did
Good.
not do that, but I will tell a quick story, and then we'll get to Mika Hanna's question. And I do have to say that Mika had one of the questions that we did answer. I gave it to Glass Wing, but it was Mika. When I was working for Rivals Corporate, I went out to Tim Tebow's announcement, and it was between Florida and Georgia. And I went down to the greater Jacksonville area and went out to breakfast, and I had interview people beforehand. It's like, where do you think Tim Tebow's going? And some people knew who he was. Oh, he's going here. Oh, I think he's going there. But most people were like, who? And then when I got into there, I had to sit there and not only announce what he was wearing, but everybody in his entourage. I'm like, well, what color socks is he wearing? So I think socks are very important. I think it's somewhere. Sock science may be the 300 level of hat science. I really do think that we're moving that way.
Does it appear that he has an alligator underneath his coat that he's going to unzip and reveal? Hard to tell. Is that a bulldog under there or an alligator?
I mean, I think we have. I don't know what the next level is going to be. Bringing out the live props and things like that. I think we're going to have to. I think we're going to have a hologram or something like that.
That's what I was going to say. Tupac is going to come out and announce for your school, basically.
That would be
the University of Compton. What? I don't think they have an FBS.
Well, I mean, if we were going to get something like that, it would have had to have been with somebody that had some means, like Bronny James when he announced for USC. He could have probably pulled something like that off.
Have a hologram of Jim Gray. I'm going to take my talents to USC.
Oh, Lord.
Jim Gray is still alive, I hope.
Yes, I believe so. I have not read anything on TMZ, though. I did watch on TMZ this morning a really fun little fight between the Nashville Sounds and Columbus Clippers. So be sure to look that up. Started at a home plate between a batter and catcher, and like the number 2 prospect in the whole Guardian system shoved the umpire. It was fun. He'll be hearing from minor league baseball and probably sit in a few games for his role in that fracas. A word that we don't use that often. Fracas.
Not enough.
Jim Gray still alive. Dylan Stewart also still alive in terms of Ohio State's board for the 2024 recruiting class. Boom, transition.
That's called a segue, folks.
Edge rusher.
Hell, Tom has worked at TV before.
Edge rusher out of Washington, D.C., 5-star prospect. Ohio State is looking at him as potentially a jack, maybe more than a true true defensive end in the Jim Knowles defense. The question for Mika Hanna is when he's going to commit, and the answer is sometime in July or August is sort of the timetable that's out there right now, but there's not a specific date. And the consensus right now is Ohio State's in front right now. He may or may not make a visit to South Carolina between now and when he commits. If he makes that visit, that would obviously be very good news for South Carolina. If he does not make that visit, that would be good news for Ohio State. So watch this space. News probably to come on him in the coming weeks.
Troy V can go ahead, Kevin. This is brilliant.
Yeah, recruiting commitment parties will be like gender reveal parties. Smash this egg, and whatever team's color comes out is where he's going to commit to. Now, what happens if you're between UGA and NC State? I mean, they're both red and black. I mean, to a certain extent. I mean, it could be very, very confusing with all of that.
Well, if the egg looks incredible and then you smash it and only about 8 wins worth comes out, then he's committing to NC State.
Also, I hope that actually this is a bad idea because we don't need this. It's going to start forest fires. There's going to be some incendiary things that they use rather than doing it the safe way. Still, it's a good idea, but yeah, the confusion would, what kids going to the wrong school. I think that's the key there.
One thing I do want to bring it up. It was something that Tony brought up, completely unrelated, on the Huddle message board over at BuckeyeHuddle.com. You should be a member over there at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Check us out. For the price of one crappy delivery pizza, not even with the delivery charge and like the 95% tip that they're going to expect, you can get a
And
month
service
at
fee.
Buckeye Huddle. It'd be ready for Big Ten Media Days and getting into fall camp, all things that you can get at BuckeyeHuddle.com, as well as Tony's great posts. Right, as well as Tony's posts on the Huddle message board. But what about fireworks versus a drone show? What would be better for an announcement there?
Well, I think both of those are fantastic. I think I'm okay with either one of those. The potential is higher for the wow factor for the drone shows, but I think it just depends on the personality of that particular person. And but I think you could do so much with the drone show. Or you know what, the Sphere out in Las Vegas, that has to be the next thing, where you use that monster thing to announce your commitment. But I'm okay with either of those, as long as if there's fireworks, there is no bulldog involved, there are no alligators involved. Let's leave the live animals out of the fireworks. Also, probably leave them out of the drones. Now that I'm thinking about that, you don't want them. You don't be flying animals up in the sky.
I think you have so much possibility for incredible trolling with a drone show, where you're going to announce it and you turn and you point to the drones and the drones all turn. This is an Ohio State versus Michigan battle, and the drones all turn maize and blue and they start to fly into the shape of something. And it's like, wait a minute, why are they making an O instead of an M? And then boom, they turn into scarlet and gray, and like, oh man, I got everyone. That feels like there's more trolling potential for a drone show than there is for fireworks. And I think that's probably, when in doubt, lean towards whatever gives you the better opportunity for trolling.
Well, that always is, when you sit there and you pick up the hat and you start to put it on your head and you throw it on the ground. I mean, that angers up a lot of blood. And I think that we need that kind of drama. And speaking of drama, let's get to Ryan Dawes' question about defensive line recruiting. Dylan Stewart or Edric Houston, who would you want over the other? I have seen Edric Houston in person at his spring game. I've not seen Dylan Stewart in person. Edric Houston is a grown, Groan, according to Vince Marrow at Kentucky, a grown-ass man. Dylan Stewart, I know, is obviously very highly rated as well. I would say Edric Houston, get another Buford kid, see if maybe that helps you a little bit more with KJ Bolden. I think there's a lot to be said there. I think Ohio State is always going to recruit well in the DC area as long as Larry Johnson's around. So my vote is for Houston.
Yeah, Houston, I have not seen. Well, I saw Dylan Stewart at camp last summer. I have not seen Edric Houston in person, as far as I'm aware. At least, doing something. I think I've seen him at maybe a visit to Ohio State or something like that. But that was it. Mark Givler said he thinks Edric Houston could very well be the number one overall prospect in the class of 2024. So I'm going to defer to Mark Givler on this one. He is the expert here. He has seen him in person. Yeah, I think there's a very realistic possibility they get both of these guys. And if you get both of these guys on top of Justin Scott, then you get into the conversation that Tony and I had on Buckeye Weekly earlier in the week, which was best defensive line recruiting classes ever. Where does this one fit? That at that point, you're having a real legitimate conversation there. So, either one, but this is like the gif of a little girl kind of shrugging and say, why not both? Like, sure. Why not both? But Edric Houston is supposedly the real deal. So I guess if you had to choose, that would be your answer. But I think, both is a real possibility here.
And the other thing to keep in mind, if they are looking at Dylan Stewart in that jack role, which is something he's done in high school, and he does it in high school, he'll move all over the place and attack the line of scrimmage. But that is something that they will be doing this year with a 4-star linebacker / defensive end, Mitchell Melton and CJ Hicks. Like, I think there are guys that you can put there to get production. There are only so many 5-star defensive ends, around the world globally, and most of them are in the U.S. But if you can get those guys, I think that's the more valuable position to fill. Not that Dylan Stewart. I think Dylan Stewart could also be that five-star defensive end, because actually, he is a five-star defensive end. But the position that they're looking to fill, I think you want the one that is, the defensive end that is hard to find, and not something that, well, the Jack is kind of a tweener thing, and that's why it's been so successful for Jim Knowles, because he's been at schools where 90% of your recruits are tweeners. They're too small for this, not fast enough for this. Well, let's put them here and we'll get something out of that. At Ohio State, you don't have to recruit tweeners, because you can get the exact model that you want. You don't have to get the Wish brand version of something. So I think there are enough guys that you could put at Jack eventually that you make Edric Houston the choice there. I do also want to mention to get back to the trolling of the drones, and I've talked about this on shows in the past. The first time I ever remember trolling via the air was in 1995 at the Michigan game in Ann Arbor, which came not too long after Ohio State announced the building and construction of Value City Arena and the Schottenstein Center. And there was a plane flying over Michigan Stadium that day that said, "Welcome Value City University." And to me, that is one of the great troll jobs of all time. I was incensed, but also I had to own it, because it was true. Ohio State was putting in a big old arena named after discount furniture. Although if you go there, it's not all that discount. It's still pretty expensive. But Value City, I mean, if you want to sponsor, go ahead. But that was an experience.
The ironic part of that, of course, is that most of the bad things that happened to Ohio State that day happened on the ground. So for this to be in the air, that's really quite a twist.
All right. On that note, if we have time at the end, we'll get back to some recruiting questions. I want to get to this question about Big Ten Media Days, and we'll hit a little expansion talk. So we check off all the boxes from the title. I want to thank everybody for watching. Be sure to hit that thumbs up if you're watching us on YouTube or on Facebook. If you're watching on us Facebook and you like what we're doing, send us stars. That helps us with beer money. Lots of beer money. So send us stars. If you're listening on any of the podcasting channels, write us a 5-star review, even if it's, "Hey, Todd." But 5-star review helps us with our distribution to everybody else. But let's get on to the next one. Are you guys going to Big Ten Media Days? Unless something changes, yeah.
What do you know that I don't know?
I know, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to
getting
to Indianapolis. Might get a steak dinner while we're there. Maybe find time for a hungry huddle.
Maybe. Yeah, and that's I got to tell you, I have covered a bunch of Big Ten Media Days over the years. They for years and years and years, this was in Chicago, and it was in the Sheraton kind of downtown, down by the the Married with Children fountain, and in that kind of downtown Chicago area in the Loop. Recently, was it 2021 that they moved it to Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis, and they just have the whole stadium. They rented out the whole stadium. That is a great layout for that. It is, you have plenty of space. It's not, a cramped hotel room. Everything's in the same basic spot. You've got media workrooms. Sometimes the Wi-Fi works. I mean, it's most of what you would want from an event like that. And just visually, it's much more interesting to be in a football stadium than to be in the basement of a hotel. So that is, I enthusiastically give the Big Ten 2 thumbs up on the location of media days. Plus, just being around downtown Indianapolis is much easier to just sort of wander around and do whatever you want to do, and it's not quite as expensive as Chicago. And we have, I think Tony and I stayed in McCormick, out by McCormick Place at one year for Big Ten Media Days, and it's just kind of it can be kind of a pain in the butt. Indianapolis, I really like the setup there.
Yeah, we certainly have seen things. I mean, it used to be on the at the Hyatt on Wacker Drive, and that was okay. And then they've moved it around, and it was at McCormick Place, and where the lunchroom was was half a mile away, and it just never timed out very well. But the move to Indianapolis, what I say is, when you have an event in Indianapolis, it's the event. When you have an event in Chicago, it's just an event. I mean, so when you're there and you're downtown and you're in the 8 square block area of downtown, everybody who's there for Big Ten Media Days. You bump into each other. You go to St. Elmo Steakhouse. If you can afford it, you're gonna run into a lot of university contingents and things of that nature. So I'm really looking forward to it. There are a lot of questions that I have going in, but that sounds like something for another show. We'll get to that, with a couple weeks to lead up. I don't want to sit there and let some stray comments wipe out 4 planned shows that we may have coming in future days. Promise a little expansion talk. Is it stalling? Is it moving? We don't know what's happening with Colorado. We still haven't seen a Pac-12 rights deal. Market X here has Oregon, UW, Washington, Stanford, Notre Dame, Miami, Georgia Tech, UNC, UVA. Get to 24 teams, 10 conference games, call it a day. The only big blind spot would be a school in Texas. And, the reality is with what are you going to get out there? Baylor, Texas Tech, Rice. I don't know. So there certainly would be the blind spot there. But what do you think about Market X's idea of 10 league games and getting it to 24 with that crew?
I would say, Tony, which of those 8 do you think is the least likely to end up in the Big Ten? Oregon, Washington, Stanford, Notre Dame, Miami, Georgia Tech, UNC, and UVA. Because to me, I think there's a very clear answer, even if they are currently pursuing AAU membership.
Tom, I don't. Yes, I know you think Miami is never going to be in the Big Ten, but they used to be in the Big East. What's the big difference?
They did. Can you imagine having a conference where you have Minnesota and USC and UCLA and Miami? The travel would be insane. And, I think any of these is a realistic possibility. I think these are kind of the names you tend to see thrown around. Notre Dame would be the biggest addition and the most logical addition if Notre Dame ever comes off of the idea of independence, which I think at some point they will. But Miami to me just feels like in a league full of academically strong, largely public land-grant universities centered in the Midwest, the small private school from South Florida that would just be a very, very weird cultural fit. And you got to remember, this is university presidents making these decisions. This is not athletic directors. It's not football coaches. It's university presidents. And you never say never. And USC is kind of a weird cultural fit in the Big Ten right now too. But Miami, of all of those, Miami feels like the least likely.
I think they definitely would love to get into Florida. And if that's the only way, then it's something they look at. I've said for a while that they should look at Georgia Tech, but the ACC grant of rights, I don't know what we're talking about, how we're going to get out of that or how they're going to get out of that so that we can move to this point. You're looking at Texas. What about how big is Texas San Antonio? Maybe is that that's maybe 30 years down the road, but let's not forget about UTSA while we're looking for schools in Texas.
Well, they just moved from CUSA to the AAC this year, so that's in terms of a market. And in terms of, that's a school that it might be the biggest city that doesn't have an NFL franchise. It might be, and they'll put 40,000 people in the Alamo Dome for big games down there. So, but institutionally, that's, that is not the type of brand where, again, university presidents are making this decision, and UTSA is probably not in the conversation there.
So you're saying that I shouldn't be going out and buying into like UT Rio Grande Valley, who is moving up in divisions in terms of its football. And Terry, we will get to your question, your super chat here in a minute. Thank you for the super chat. What about if you're at 24 playing 10 league games? Then it's 5-5. You move from 9, and is the SEC still playing 8? Are you playing 2 more league games than other conferences at that point? You get rid of these marquee intersectional type of games so you can sit there and say, all right, we're going to have 7 home games. We're going to have the 2 non-conference games are both going to be home games, and then we're going to have 5 home games as part of the 10. What are your thoughts there?
Well, I think if they go, what is the time frame for adding 8 teams? Are they doing it all in one fell swoop, or is this over 16 years?
I mean, based on the ACC's grant of rights, and let's just take 30 seconds to define our terms here for people who maybe don't remember what that is. When you sign a TV contract, you sign what's called a grant of rights, and that's every school in the conference signs over its media rights to the conference, and they're basically saying the league is going to pay you, and then you're going to pay us. And so the league owns your media rights. And so if you leave the league, the ACC can tell UNC and Virginia, if UNC and Virginia said tomorrow, we want to leave and join the Big Ten, the ACC would say, okay, but your media rights come to us. And are we going to send those to you? Like, maybe not. And so, well, that's going to be distributed to member institutions, which you will not be a member institution anymore. So good luck with that. And the ACC's, ironically, the thing that makes everyone want to pull the ripcord on the ACC right now is the fact that they have a terrible TV contract with ESPN, which they basically signed one, I think it was like 10 years ago now, where when they formed the ACC network, in order to get the ESPN to set up the ACC network, they needed, the ESPN demanded a long term, I think it was like a 20-year contract, and it expires like 2036, I believe. So all those teams have signed over their grant of rights until 2036. So, there's been lots of talk and there's been lots of grumbling and, public conversations about how teams are not happy with what they're getting paid, and lots of billable hours. Everyone sort of looked at the contracts and no one has moved, which sort of makes me think maybe that means that everyone sort of thinks, well, there's not a real good, clean way to get out of this. So, in terms of a move to 24 and the ACC splintering and Clemson and Florida State going to the SEC and North Carolina and Virginia and Georgia Tech going to the Big Ten and whoever else going wherever else, that's probably still a decade away or more from that happening, unless people can figure out a way out of the grant of rights. So, in terms of getting to 24, the Pac-12 hasn't signed their current TV contract yet. They're still negotiating that. The speculation is that that's probably going to be something that they do in a 6-ish year term. So you're looking at maybe 2030, something like that, when that would be up. So maybe, Oregon and Washington and Stanford or whoever from the Pac-12, you could bring them on board to the Big Ten when that deal expires at the end of the decade. But the ACC and those teams, that's probably another 5-6 years out.
Yeah, I'm still a believer that the ACC does not see this grant of rights out, and because it could get dissolved in the other direction, and ESPN could sit there and say, ESPN certainly has its hands all over the SEC, and there could be a way to bolster the SEC and their investment there, and if they come to the table and help broker a deal to put other ACC teams in other conferences, that maybe they get a share back into those media rights deals. But I think that if we're going to see something like that, I think we're still going to have to get to the termination date of this recently executed Big Ten deal. So I think that I still think 2030 would probably be around the time that we could see that on the landscape. It's not near term. Now, if the Pac-12 deal does not come together, if Colorado and Arizona and Utah and ASU all see it, and it's going to be 1 game on Apple and 6 games on Lifetime movie network or whatever, things could move a little bit quicker. But I don't think that lightens up the consequences for the ACC with the grant of rights.
Be on MTV with a 3-hour lead-in of ridiculousness, followed by a 3-hour post-game show of ridiculousness.
Hey, they have a lot of Teen Mom crap on there too. Don't forget. We're gonna celebrate people who made very major mistakes and let them live in mediocreness, which I think is what ridiculousness is. But Back to recruiting for a second. Terry Kovac with the super chat. Thank you. Will OSU end with the number 1 class?
No.
No has historically been the answer, right? And I think Ohio State's going to be in the conversation for the number 1 class, and I think they certainly have. This is about as realistic a shot as they've had at getting the number 1 class, because they already are the number 2 class in the country, and they've only got 18 commits, and they're going to, this is a year where they're actually going to take enough guys that you could potentially get in that conversation. They have the number 1 overall class right now in terms of average rating per recruit, and they're going to be taking a big enough class that they could end up in terms of total points being number 1. Alabama is still lurking. Alabama. This is the time of year when everyone goes, "What's wrong with Nick Saban?" And the answer is nothing. He just doesn't end up with a lot of commitment. It's early in the cycle. He already has 3 5-stars committed. You got to beat Alabama. You got to beat Georgia. But Ohio State is. It would be pretty surprising to me if Ohio State was not in the top 3, and if this did not rank as one of, if not the best classes in Ohio State history. But if you're giving me Ohio State versus the field for the number 1 pick, number 1 class overall, it's probably smart to take the field. But this is a year when Ohio State has as good a chance to do it as pretty much any.
Kevin, I'll just say, you can say, well, if Ohio State gets this guy that they lead for, when was the last time in July that Ohio State got all of the guys that they led for in December? Like, they leading for somebody now is great. They led for a lot of guys last year, and I'm not trying to upset people, but they led for Damon Wilson. They, Keon Keeley, Mateo Uliangalele. They led for those guys at some point in the summer. What happened? And so we kind of have this talk every year, but if they were able to land everybody, like, now's the only time we could talk about it, because it doesn't end up happening. But even then, if they landed everybody, you're still maybe going to be better than, maybe going to be higher than Georgia. Like, maybe. Like, if everything went perfectly for you, then maybe. Like, even the 2017 class, which was incredible. I think that's the highest Ohio State has finished in the internet era with the number 2 class. Maybe the 2002, maybe it was also the number 2 class. I can't remember. But in 2017, they had 5 guys in the top 24 of the 24/7 composite, and that didn't include J.K. Dobbins and Trayvon Grimes and Tate Martell, Haskell Garrett, and they still finished second. And that was Chase Young, and that was Jeff Okuda and Wyatt Davis and guys like that. And like, if that class isn't going to finish number 1, good luck having any class finish number 1.
And I will just throw a counterpoint on that. 2017 class, Ohio State was number 2 in the nation, Alabama number 1, Georgia number 3. In that class, Ohio State had the highest average ranking per recruit, but signed 8 fewer guys than Georgia, than Alabama. So that was, again, a year where Ohio State signed really, really, really high-level players, but just had a relatively small class. This is at least going to be a class where the number is big enough that you could really be plausibly having that conversation.
But Kevin, how many players do they count in the class?
Well, and that's what I was going to say. Everybody has a different formula for how they work things out. I know the Rivals formula because I worked for Rivals for so long, and it's the top 20 players. But if you have a class of 22 and Georgia has a class of 28, Georgia's able to drop its 8 lowest players. You're able to drop your 2 lowest players, and which may be a kicker and an in-state. I'm wildcatting on this guy. I think he's going to end up being pretty good or whatever. So the numbers are kind of against you. Let's also remember it is July 7th as we do this show here live on youtube.com/BuckeyeHuddle. There are going to be a lot of rankings updates. Now, is Jeremiah Smith going to be the number 2 player when the rankings updates are done in the nation? Is he going to be number 1? Is he going to be number 10? There's a lot of movement that can happen at this point. So you could just sit there and put your class together and say, well, this is what Ohio State's going to get. And this is the math. And I've done the formula. And that's not necessarily what the final number is going to be. Guys are going to blow up during their senior year. Whatever reason that there's movement is going to happen. And the numbers aren't going to flush out that way. But I will say this. The average star ranking is very important in my eyes in terms of if you're trying to determine a national recruiting champion and you want to take out a lot of the chicanery of how the formulas work and everything else. the star rating is the way to tell, in my opinion, because that way the 22-man class is not underweighted against the 28-man class. So that's my view. And then at that point too, you're taking into account the entire class. And we're not seeing a 32-man class by Ole Miss, several years ago, or any of that type of stuff. So, I guess back to the question, to the super chat, does Ohio State land the number one class? The math is there to potentially, but we can't predict what Georgia and Alabama and some of these others are going to do. And while Ohio State could end up with a 3,200 point class on Rivals, Georgia could end up with 3,400. Alabama could end up with 3,500. And dare I throw out there the Bama bump, which of course some people say is a Buckeye bump, but in my own, I'm putting my tinfoil hat on here. There were a lot of times that Ohio State in the final updates would have 25 kids in their class. 3 would move up, 3 would hold steady, and then 19 would end up somehow moving down. So, I mean, again, you just don't know. I'm more concerned about where Ohio State finishes versus Michigan rather than where you are against a couple of SEC teams when all of the kids are out of SEC country.
Well, and I think we would all agree, and everybody watching would agree, the best way to measure one team versus the other is recruiting rankings.
By height.
And so you look at what Ohio State has done against Michigan. I think there's no question who the superior program is there.
Let me keep moving here. Market X, now in Lifetime, Meredith Baxter Burney stars in a new drama film followed by Oregon State versus Arizona. I mean, you just never know. It's just like when you sit there and you watch those 3 or 4 days that where True TV is on your dial, and you watch basketball followed up by Practical Jokers. So there you go. Jordan Kapler, I've been hearing that some SEC beat writers have been to 12 out of 15 practices. What would it take for the OSU beat to get that kind of access? I have my ideas. I'm going to see what you guys say.
Speaking for myself, I appreciate all of the access that we are given, and I have no corrections to make, no criticisms of anybody to import here on the air where people could see it and hold it against me. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. It does feel like those programs probably, you have access to see more things, which means you can report more accurately on things and might lead to less speculation. And people who don't have access, not being able to report things without having some pushback from people who did see things. I mean, this is always, there's some give and take with all of this, because you have seen programs cut back on access overall a whole bunch, and that limits the amount of information that gets out, but it also might there are some negatives to that as well. So it is a give and take with all of that.
I will tell you this for sure. They're not getting to 12 or 15 practices at UGA. No. I know for a fact of talking to people who cover UGA, they see their team a lot less than we see Ohio State. So if you're Vandy, sure, let the media call a couple plays. I mean, it doesn't really matter. I mean, you're in a team you're in a city in Nashville that's got the Titans, and it's got the Preds and everything else. You've got a lot of pro product. You've got to work to compete to get, any ink in the newspaper or whatever. But I think that your bigger programs that feel like they don't need the media in a lot of ways aren't necessarily going to open the doors. I don't think there's a coach out there that's like, yeah, we really need to have the media in here a lot more. They are a very, very protective lot over their product.
I don't know. Every year at media days, the coaches start off by thanking the media. But I believe that is heartfelt. I believe that comes from a place of honor, of respect, and for a desire to communicate. Don't you?
I just like to follow up by asking if the Georgia court reporters get to see more of the team than the.
They do.
Mm-hmm.
Let me find the question that I was at. I was muting somebody. Please, we're not going to get to every question. Throwing it out there 49 times probably isn't going to move you up. Throwing out 49 super chats will move you up, though. So we'll throw that out there. Back to recruiting a little bit here. Mika Hanna, does Tavian St. Clair ranking change to 5-star? I think that he has the measurables. I think that he has, certainly the offer list. I think it's all there, but ask me after we see what he looks like at Bell Fountain this year. I mean, prove it on the field. Proving it in camps is one thing. Prove it on the field. So if there's an August update, and I don't know the calendar of everybody, do I expect him to be a 5-star at that point? No. But I think that midway through the high school football season, I think that if he goes out there and he's 35 pounds heavier and he's got much more command of his game, and we see it, and and the big thing is, I know I'm going to go out and try and see a game of his this year for sure, if not more than one. Have the tape out there, have it on Huddle and everywhere else. I think there is a possibility, but with that being said, even the most liberal in terms of spreading out the most 5-star networks don't really have much more than 40 some. I mean, and like I know Rivals generally is like in the mid 30s. I think 24/7 gets up into the high 40s. So I mean, the biggest thing I'll say for St. Clair is Ohio State had an opportunity to kind of name its quarterback. I don't know if necessarily could have landed Bryce Underwood, maybe, and it chose St. Clair. So that's that's worth something. But we're talking about a 25 at this point. There's a long ways to go.
Yeah, he has half of his high school career still to go. So there's plenty of time for him to move up. And based on how much he has changed as a player and just physically over the last 12 months, there's probably still some improvement to that you can see. But you have seen people that Ohio State has offered as quarterbacks over the decades, very early in their careers where they just didn't end up developing. And sometimes that's a guy who commits as a freshman and then doesn't end up signing with Ohio State because the progression isn't there. The progression has been there with Tavian St. Clair. I mean, Tavian St. Clair, 7-on-7 camp in 2022 versus 7-on-7 camp in 2023 was a very different player. So what is he going to look like this fall? And then you got a whole nother year of development, a whole nother year of working in the playbook and learning, the mental half of the game and all that kind of stuff, including plus physical development, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. I mean, 100% he could end up there. I think at this point, Ohio State's quarterback recruiting is such that you're probably going to get the benefit of the doubt if Ryan Day and Brian Hartline and Corey Dennis have kind of put the stamp of approval on you. That's probably going to be something that people are looking at and viewing as something that's a useful data point, and then go through the Elite 11 process and all that next year. There's a lot of time. Again, he's halfway through his high school career. So yes, it's, where he is right now is definitely not where he's going to be when he steps foot on campus in the summer or spring of 2025.
Yeah. When we've talked about him in the past, we've kind of compared his trajectory to Drew Aller, except it's happening a little sooner. Like Aller burst late and became a 5-star guy. I think Kevin, as committing, hurt his opportunity to be a 5-star guy because there's no what's the boost for bumping him up to a 5-star guy, and how many guys from the networks are actually going to go to Bell Fountain and actually see him in person?
I think the hope is that he goes to Elite 11 next year and you see him kind of on the national situation. We are seeing a lot more national type games, but Bell Fountain isn't necessarily going to be like, we're going to go play IMG. I mean, that's not what happens generally, but yeah, there is a belief that if you commit early that, what is the point of trying to go out and scout a guy because, the hay is in the barn. He's already committed to Ohio State. Your Ohio State site is going to get as much stroke out of it as that's done. But I think that these guys have a lot of pride in terms of having the most correct rankings. We would get through the end of the year and then we would look back a couple of years after people have played and it's like, oh, we were better than them. And we certainly were better than them because we were right. So, I can be all skeptical and say, well, the biggest sites in our network are A, B, and C. So we need to make sure A, B, and C's kids have a little more oomph. Tie goes to them. But, that may just be my skeptic hat. But I certainly had some interesting conversations along the way. And by conversations, I mean with my voice raised and hitting the table over Ohio guys being underrated.
I think Ted Ginn should be a 5-star. No, Kevin.
No,
Ted Ginn.
No, I didn't have to fight that one. But remember, Ted Ginn was listed as a DB coming out of high school. So
I think he should be a linebacker. Kevin, no, we like him as a corner.
Market X, what now the cats have come back in here are fighting, so I apologize for any background noise. What is your favorite Big Ten road trip?
Nebraska. Not even close. Nebraska is my favorite. Wisconsin's fun. I haven't been to Wisconsin in like 20 years, so that'll be fun this year. But Nebraska is always my favorite. I love the city. I love the stadium. I love the fan base. I love the campus. It's a lot of fun. Lots of fun traditions you get to see. It's just, it's one of those places that you saw on TV growing up. You remember watching Nebraska games as a kid. Like everything about Nebraska is my favorite.
Nebraska is generally my first answer, and not just because of the Iowa 80 truck stop that we stop at on the way. It's like it is the longest road trip, so it's good that there are things to do along the way and also experience Nebraska football. The Penn State trip is interesting to me because it's not a fun trip, but it's a cool place to see a game. But the press box sucks, but the food is good, and they have ice cream. But getting to the food and ice cream sucks because of the narrow walkways and the press box being what it is. So there's some give and take there. But it's always a big game at Penn State, and Nebraska is always a fun trip because there's fun stuff to do, and then also Nebraska being what it is.
Yeah, I have always flown to Nebraska, so I've not had to deal with the drive. We got a couple of drives this year. Nebraska is a great trip. If you're a steak lover, there are a lot of places.
Runza.
There's not a Runza. No, a cabbage hot pocket is not for me. But
Runza?
I'm sure it gives you the Runza, but
we have Runza at home.
The fans, I'm just going to keep moving right on. We're going to try and end the show at 2:30, so 14 minutes to go. The fans out there are great. I mean, it's just a fun trip. But Madison, I don't get to make that trip all that often. The press box isn't all that special when they do jump around. That's how I'm going to meet my maker. Is the press box is going to fall during jump around because the whole thing starts shaking, and it's a good thing they don't do jump around at Penn State because that press box surely would fall because it is a piece of crap. I'm willing to sit there and say probably my least favorite Big Ten road trip is Purdue because that stadium sucks, and they've moved the media parking even further out, and you have to take a golf cart, and you don't even get to drive it out into the depths of West Lafayette to get to your car. So and the post game media room, the bus exhaust like backs right into the media room, and it's screw Purdue.
Yes, the media parking at Purdue famously. Oh, don't worry, it has a shuttle. What is the shuttle? It's a golf cart. Now, can everybody fit on this golf cart at once? No. We'll be back for you in about 30 minutes. Just hold tight.
I remember the last time we were there, and it was late-ish in the season, and it was kind of chilly, and you're driving there on the golf cart. It's like, it's a little chilly. And then after the game, it's this endless game, and it's late at night, and one of the members of our traveling party had a backpack with a bunch of stuff in it stolen, and we're on the golf cart riding back to the parking lot in the middle of the night. It's freezing cold, and it was like, this is not the most fun I've had in my entire life. And that was Purdue is not the most, like, there's not a ton to do in West Lafayette. It's not like a real destination trip. You end up staying in Indianapolis half the time. That's one thing that holds Penn State back for me a little bit. Like covering the game at Penn State in 2020 when there was no one there, so you could get a hotel in State College and drive 7 minutes to the stadium and be there, and there was no problem with parking or anything like that. That was a very different experience covering Penn State than a typical game at Penn State where you stay in Altoona or Clearfield or Bedford, and you have to drive in, and then it's a night game, and you drive out, and you're getting back to the hotel at 3 a.m. or something. That is not the best of times, but hey, Tony, if we could only have another global pandemic, Penn State, I would be totally down for another Penn State trip.
Well, don't try and buy beer in Pennsylvania either, because that's a pain as well. So you have to have your road pops already at the hotel. If you stop at the hotel, Yeah, the Penn State trip has got its pluses and minuses, a lot of minuses, but I would still rather do that than Purdue because you're driving. You're like, well, we're going to get to go to Chicago. It's so close. Oh, no, we have to go to West Lafayette.
The last time we went to Purdue, the shuttle, you know how it sucks when you want to get on the elevator and now it's too full and you can't get on it. So you're left behind. It's like, well, I'll just catch the next elevator. That was me the last time at West Lafayette with the shuttle. And it's like, well, I'll just catch the next shuttle because like everybody else gets on and you got your camera equipment, all you photographers and whatnot, and carrying what you are. And then I guess I'll just hang out, see what's on my Twitter, what's going on as you wait to get somebody to come back for you. I've never covered a game at Wisconsin, so I am looking forward to that. I don't know if I'm necessarily looking forward to the press box, but to experience it, I guess. So I do. I was at the 2010 game in the stands, and that was awesome. That was an awesome experience to see the fans go crazy. And I know that's going to be maybe the game of the year, one of the 4 games of the year in the Big Ten. The game of the year of that week, certainly in the Big Ten.
At least at Wisconsin, they do now have a shuttle to the media parking garage, which is not necessarily close. There was a year at Wisconsin because like these parking garages are like in a residential neighborhood. I mean, it's just really weird how it's set up, and I don't pay attention to small details like that. So I like got out of the game, and I'm like, all these streets look the same. I have no idea where this parking garage is. I may just have to like live here. I don't know. I may never find this car. I didn't drop a pin with my phone to find it. So yeah, that does take some points away. That was a pretty traumatic experience. And speaking of trauma, let's talk about hot dogs.
Oh, geez.
How many hot dogs could you eat in a competition? Jordan Kapler wants to know by way of Super Chat. Anyone think they could dethrone Joey Chestnut?
I can tell you that I went to a Dime a Dog day at Cooper Stadium back when the Clippers played there when I was back in college. And the challenge at the time was eat your age. And so I was college age. So it was 20 or so hot dogs. And I got there before the game with one of my roommates. We started eating hot dogs. And I think I got to, 6 or 7 or 8 or something like that before the game. And then I was like, all right, I'm going to take a little break. And then all of a sudden it was like the 8th inning. And it was like, I'm still not in the mood for any more hot dogs. So I might have gotten to 12 or something like that. But that's one of those things where the aftermath is regrettable. It was like, I don't think I ate anything for about 36 hours after that. And it was just like, I need to drink more water. There's just salt coming out of every pore in your body. And it is not a good feeling at all. So I respect the hustle. I'm glad they got it in weather-wise this year, but no, I'm not. I mean, I don't think I think I probably could eat more than that. I don't think I would be willing to eat more than that. Like, it's just, you get more than 8 or so, and it starts being not that fun.
Well, it's because you're consuming them. Like you're just eating them normally. Like if you were to dunk and shove, like how with the dunk and shove, how much could you do? I think maybe that is the question we should be answering. But I think everybody that has lived in Columbus for any amount of decades, yeah, I did Dime a Dog one game, and I remember the limit was you can only buy 5 at a time, and I remember thinking, what a rip. It's like because guys would be going to give me 15 or whatever, So I got my 5, and then of course, and this is not a joke, there's no ketchup, so it's like, and I'm not going to put mustard on it, so you're just eating like 5 dry hot dogs. I assume I ate them all, but I know I didn't go back for more because it's like I'm not going back in line for more hot dogs. I'll just sit. I'm going to stick right here, dealer. I'm going to stick with the 5, and then hopefully I don't bust.
I was going to say, if you have to do this Nathan's hot dog challenge style where you're dipping the buns and everything, I wouldn't make it past 1. I would just gag on that. I'd just be like, hell no.
Well, you eat 2 at a time. That's the thing. You could do 2.
I don't even really like hot dogs all that much because these are like the boiled hot dogs in water, and it's just gross. I mean, if you put them on, if they're over like a grill or something like that, and you add a little texture with like you burn up the skin a little bit, then then okay. But I mean, 4. I mean, I think I could do 4. I mean, but that's about it.
I think I could
have
do more brats than hot dogs.
I have a suggestion. In lieu of a hot dog eating competition, how about a hot dog water drinking competition? Who could drink the most hot dog water? I feel like I could probably win by drinking about 6 ounces because both of you guys would tap real early.
Is it warm or is it cold? I don't know. Which is worse?
Yes.
Tepid.
I don't know that temperature is the deciding factor there in the unpleasantness of that experience.
Ugh, gross. No. All right. Let me find another question because I certainly do not want to end on that one.
I saw a good one from someone earlier asking about Iowa. Mika Hanna asked about Iowa in terms of Iowa being a road trip. I greatly enjoy Iowa as a road trip. Iowa City is just a nice town. There's there's good restaurants there. This is not the most cosmopolitan place in the world. You're not going to Manhattan or whatever, but it is a very nice town. The stadium is nice. It's a good setup. They do the wave there. The people are nice. It's a cool and unique thing. It's just a great atmosphere for home games there. They just kind of do home games well there. So Iowa would be, it's like Nebraska minus kind of in terms of, and that's not a bad thing. Nebraska is my A+. Iowa's like an A or A- game experience. That's near the top of my list as well.
And normally you don't have to experience too many touchdowns there, but that was not what we experienced in 2017 by any stretch.
No. We're going to go kind of rapid fire to clear the queue. We've got 4 left in the queue, and that'll end the show unless we get some super chats along the way. So if you want to hear more from us, gots to pay. Glasswing Butterfly, how nervous are you guys about injuries this year?
Well, I'm worried about falling down some stairs. It can be treacherous there in Ohio Stadium. But last year, all of those different injuries, like there were some freak injuries, and Jackson Smith and Jigba injuring his hamstring by being like hit in the neck. Like I don't even know how that math equates against Notre Dame. And Mayan Williams hurts his hand by falling into the first down marker chain. Like these aren't just normal hamstring tweaks from bad turf or stuff like that. There are some weird ones out there. So the hope is that last year was a fluke. But if you look like the injury history, like it continues to pick up, and I don't know if that's the result of more games or what it is. But you hope that things trend back down because it was just a whole bunch of flukes last year.
Yeah, you hope it was an outlier year because statistically it felt like an outlier year, but we'll see. If you start having the same spate of injuries off the start of this year, then I think you can start worrying. Chad Stryker wants to know, do you guys expect Ryan Day to change his strategy for injury reports this year? That seemed to be a big point of frustration for many last year. And this kind of goes in line with some of the practice stuff we talked about earlier, where it's like you can, by not revealing it, you're keeping information away from the other team, but you're also keeping information away from your own fans, and you're keeping information away from media in some cases. And then you can get, why is this guy's playing bad? Is it because he's a bum, or is it because he's hurt, or he's been dealing with something, or he's, there is this kind of like give and take in terms of how much information do you want to release. There are pros and cons to releasing more or less. Day has always tended to be on the much more conservative side. He releases less than Urban Meyer used to release, and Urban Meyer was not always super, super excited about releasing injury information. That's, I think, just a little bit of a philosophical thing, and you'll have, that's probably a little bit of a health privacy information thing as well, which, that's a whole separate conversation. But, I'm not expecting a dramatic difference out of Ryan Day this year in terms of injury reports, but last year didn't go great, so maybe try something new. I don't know.
Well, I mean, and people are like, well, gamblers need to know this information. Well, now the NC2A is having to sit there and adjust its gambling policy for, athletes. If they get busted for, betting on the sport or whatever, I just can't imagine that they're going to sit there and say, well, we're going to mandate the release of information from schools for those purposes. There's really not a ton of upside, in my opinion. I mean, I guess I can understand he's hurt, so that's why, he may be underperforming, but I mean, these coaches are in such a small little space that they're not really that concerned about that. They're concerned, we're just trying to figure out how to beat Minnesota. So, it's just kind of, I don't think that there is a huge push for coaches to be more forthcoming. I would like to see maybe something along the lines of going through the week the way that the NFL does kind of its participation reports. If you're going through practice or not. I mean, it's still pretty vague in terms of, questionable, probable, whatever, and do that through the week. But those who watch the channel and watch our pregame shows, we do get the participation reports like going into the game. And even that, we could sit there and say 30 minutes before a game, so-and-so is, is going to be a game time decision and they're in the first play, or somebody just doesn't play who we're expecting and they weren't on any report. So it's not even really worth the paper that it is printed on.
Well, and I think that created issues last year as well. It wasn't necessarily the injury report. It was guys not playing who weren't on the report. And it's like, what the heck? Ryan Day doesn't like to talk about injuries because one of the reasons is for the players' families and privacy and things like that. And so if that's the case, then it's not about strategy. Then the players, like as Chad Stryker said, it hurt the players too. Like Trey Henderson, no one really knew how hurt he was. If there's no policy on talking about injuries, players are on social media constantly. They could tell you, hey, I missed the game because I had this injury in the foot, that sort of thing. If there's no rule stopping that, then nothing is stopping that. And the player doesn't have to live in this shadow of secrecy on what their situation is. They can just tell people, hey, I wish I could have played, but I've injured my knee. Like if it's about protecting the players and protecting the families and privacy, then if a player doesn't want to be private, and heads up, players, everything is on social media. So privacy is like the last thing that they're concerned about anymore. Unless there is something stopping them from saying it, there's nothing stopping them from saying it and clearing any of the air.
We get back to recruiting for the last two. Once again, I want to thank everybody for watching. I want to thank Tom and Tony for helping carry the load here on this show. I know Tony's got a ketchup tasting to go to after all of this. Mika Hanna, do we land KVA? Go ahead.
Linebacker Kingston Viliamuasa out of California. He's out of Bellflower, California. St. John Bosco, same program that produced Court Williams and Wyatt Davis, among a whole lot of other teams or players over the years. And I think they were the national champions last year. They are an incredible program. He was the first player in the class of 2024 to receive an Ohio State offer. He is still, has Ohio State right at the top of his list. I'm going to say yes when he commits on July 23rd. He is the third linebacker in the class, joining Peyton Pierce and Garrett Stover, and closing what would be a really, really strong linebacker class in James Laurinaitis' first year with the Buckeyes.
Yeah, I agree. And earlier this week, I was watching the St. John Bosco Mater Dei championship game, watching KVA go against Jordan Davison, the 5-star 2025 running back. So you can look that up on YouTube, see them go essentially one-on-one for quite a bit of that game.
Yeah, I like KVA landing at Ohio State as well. Notre Dame was a big factor for KVA as well. Last year, James Laurinaitis was at Notre Dame last year. When you move him to Ohio State, couple that with Ohio State, being very early in on the process, I just think that he is going to end up with the Buckeyes, and we're going to round out again, unless we get a super chat along the way, with a question from Chad Stryker. If we're sticking with Cruton here, how do you guys feel about Brandon Baker, the big offensive lineman? I believe we'll get a modern day guy when we actually get one.
That's how I am. I think the one they get is in 2025 with Jordan Davison.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And, they've gotten a bunch of guys at St. John Bosco over the years. Mater Dei has just, for whatever reason, Ohio State is always in the top 3 for these guys, and they never somehow end up getting one. I think the field is the safe bet there with Brandon Baker. If they could get him, man, that would be a huge addition. That would be, maybe the single biggest addition they could put on the offensive side of the ball in this class right now. But, yeah, I would not expect that to be the case. But, as Tony said, 5-star running back in 2025, Jordan Davison, that, if you're asking who breaks the Ohio State Mater Dei seal there, I'm going to go with Jordan Davison.
As I've said many times, Nicky Sualua, last player to go from Mater Dei to Ohio State. I too will believe it when I see it. I think 25 will be the year that it happens, when Ohio State really could land 7 top running backs just the way that class looks. They're not going to be able to take 7, but Jordan Davison is just special. Brandon Baker would be a tremendous get for Ohio State. I'm not willing to say that you should just quit paying attention to his recruitment, but the field is certainly the bet that I would suggest everybody taking. But that should wrap it all up there in terms of questions. Once again, be sure to hit the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. I never know when I'm going to do my next show, so you want to make sure that you don't miss that, as well as shows that are much more regular on the channel, including the Buckeye Weekly Podcast, Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning, the Skull Session Recruiting Podcast, and anything else that we put up here. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Give us that thumbs up. If you're listening on any of the podcasting networks, give us a 5-star review over there. And if you're watching us on Facebook, why not send us some stars, a little beer money, maybe some hot dog water for Tom. It's all there. But that sounds about it. Any final thoughts as we wrap it up and push into the weekend?
I don't think we can send it into the weekend with anything more appropriate than hot dog water. So I think we're done here.
Hot dog water, ice cubes.
Oh, jeez.
Really
and your
chill
bourbon.
Chill your drink. Oh, man. Yeah.
Good night, everybody.
I mean, everybody's crazy about, we just had a super chat come in. Everybody's just crazy about, I have to have bacon and everything. Could hot dog become the new bacon? Could we just sit there and see hot dog infused cocktails?
Can we please get back to talking about hot dog water rather than the super chat?
Super chat from Omar Austin, good friend of the show and good friend of Buckeye
Is he
Huddle.
though?
Yes, he is. I like Omar. Gun to head. Oh, geez. Maybe he's not. I just saw the orange and I just clicked on it. Who wins in a wrestling match that consists of a baby pool, Jello, and baby oil? I just know the babyface gangsta Tom Orr is mentioned in there. That's whoa. Anybody else want a super chat before we leave here? Yes, as Doug Shepard says there, I wish you would refund Omer's super chat. I don't know how to reverse the charges, but suddenly hot dog water is much more appealing than anything else that we're talking about there. I think that it was just a matter of just a wrestling match altogether. I don't know. I think that let dovetail to this. Who do you have in Zuck versus Elon? If they do go in fight in an octagon, who do you have?
Isn't Mark Zuckerberg like a Brazilian jiu-jitsu something or other or whatever?
I think he's like a yellow belt or something. I don't know.
Still enough.
Yeah, I mean he's got all the former Twitter engineers on his side, so I'm sure he's gotten the better of Elon this week. So I'm gonna go with Zuck on that one.
Tony?
Yeah, for sure. Definitely taking Zuckerberg, who hasn't been a billionaire his entire life, so he's had to come up, through the streets. Probably not though, but still,
the mean streets of Cambridge, Massachusetts. Yes.
Well, I'm going to take Elon because I don't think that Zuck is going to be able to steal anything from the Winklevoss twins in order to get ready for this fight. And Elon only has to learn enough to not walk into something stupid. And he's got a reach advantage. He's got a size advantage.
Yeah, real good history there. If that's all you need is for him not to walk into something stupidly, yes, good chances of that happening.
I'll see you two jerks on Threads then. How about that? But, one final super chat from Ryan Dawes, who is saving us from ourselves. Have a great weekend, guys. And I think that is something that we all can agree to.
Enjoy the pool wrestling, everybody.
Yes. No hot dog challenges this weekend, but everybody have a great weekend. And we will talk to Omar paid for an answer.
Tony's the tallest. Tony's like the biggest. Size wise, you go with Tony. I'm the youngest and probably I'm gonna say most agile.
How agile can you be covering it when everybody's covered in Jello and oil?
Well, I mean, I've watched Kevin try to get up after sitting on the ground at the indoor facility and trying to edit something. So I think Kevin's the first one eliminated.
And then the rest is just like waiting for me to lose my breath, and then it's over.
No, this is going to be like King of the Ring, and Tony and I are going to team up to pin you, Tom. And then then somebody will run in and we'll have like a dirty finish or whatever. I'm gonna go Ric Flair, the low blow or whatever. And I'm the meanest. I'm the meanest. I'm certainly not the most athletic, but I'm the meanest. I pick me. I think I
Jet
win.
flying, crotch punching, wheeling dealing son of a gun, Kevin.
Yeah.
It's the much easier question is who's the much easier question is who's the loser, and the answer is everyone. Everyone is the loser.
Yes, nobody wins. Everybody who signed up for this on pay-per-view will end up on a government list.
It's just the gif of Abe Simpson walking in and walking out. Like, what's going on in this place? Oh, I'm out of here.
I just got directions to the wrestling match to get directions to get away from the wrestling match.
You got the answer you paid for, Omar, and now I'm going to find one of those Men in Black mind erasers to erase the last 5 minutes of the show from my memory. But before anything else leads us down a path that none of us want to go, I'm going to thank everybody for watching, and we will talk to you all very soon.